Caitlyn Avril Murray, missing from Quesnel, British Columbia. On September 30th, 2013, 21-year-old Caitlyn was caught by cameras going to the Fraser Footbridge in Quesnel, British Columbia. Cameras caught her parking near that bridge. There is a camera in the middle of the bridge, but it was non-operational at the time. It's known that she arrived at approximately 12:45 a.m. Caitlyn was feeling pretty depressed after a recent breakup with someone she had been dating for a long time. She was pretty open that she wasn't in a good place when she went to the bridge that day, but she'd been texting two friends, and at the time she wrote that she was considering jumping. Quesnel RCMP, the Search and Rescue, and Air Services all began searching around the footbridge, the Fraser River, the surrounding banks, park, forest. Despite the rigorous search, she remains missing. It would come out later that 45 minutes after her other text, though, she had texted her friends to say she was no longer considering jumping, she was feeling better, and she was going to go home and go to bed. That was just it. No one ever saw her again. She was about 5 feet tall and had blonde hair and blue eyes. She wasn't caught on camera leaving, and her car stayed where it was. So did she jump? Did she maybe accidentally fall? Or did somebody else meet her on that bridge and do something? Her parents are on record saying they don't believe she jumped, and of course her text indicated that she'd changed her mind. In the past, anyone who jumped, as others have, their remains were always found. Additionally, Caitlyn had just graduated from the College of New Caledonia, and she was to begin working as a healthcare worker. Her parents have gone on record saying that they believe the fact that she considered suicide has been a convenient excuse for not investigating her disappearance. Without having a working camera on the bridge, it can't be ruled out that someone came upon her before she left. The area itself is one that has been known to have drug addicts inhabiting the area. They were clear that it was a pretty good area if somebody was going to target someone. The camera on the bridge has been fixed, thanks in part to Caitlyn's family, as they applied pressure on the community in order to replace it. Even if someone targeted her there and something happened, it would be more likely she would have gone over the bridge despite searching the water and the surrounding area. Caitlyn wasn't found there. Caitlyn's ex had assaulted her prior to the breakup, and he had charges pending. Those charges were dropped as Caitlyn didn't show up in court. The contact number for her case is displayed here. Caitlyn Avril Murray has been missing for 9 years. If she's still alive, she would be 30 years old today. Amy B. Sher, missing from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Amy Sher was very close to her family when she began dating Robert Desmond in the 1990s. However, Desmond was extremely controlling and rude to her family members. He would eventually begin placing abusive calls to her and her family, and it got so bad that members felt they had to obtain restraining orders to make it stop. And as they had much proof as to this, they were granted the restraining orders. But Amy chose to stay with Robert, and as a result, contact ended with her and her family. The years would wind on, but her family never forgot or stopped worrying about Amy. From the best I can tell, they live in Michigan. They would hire a private investigator who would try to track her down. She was living in Massachusetts, and the investigator would stop to speak with her in the parking lot of her job at the Leahy Clinic in Burlington, Massachusetts. She would go home that day, October 14th, 2002, saying she didn't feel very well. She would call in sick to work for the next 2 days, and she did this herself. On the third day, however, it was her husband, Robert Desmond, who called to say she was too sick to come to work. He also inquired as to the boss's email. The reason he would give is that Amy had an email she wanted to send him, but she was unable to do it herself. He did email the clinic attaching a resignation letter that is alleged to have been written by Amy herself. Her supervisor, however, was adamant that it wasn't her signature on the letter at all, and this was the last the clinic would hear from her. In fact, she had one paycheck left, and that paycheck would go uncollected. Her supervisor would say she had a terrible feeling about this. It was apparently common knowledge at her job how she was treated by her husband. As a result, her employer contacted the police. In response, the police would search out her husband, Robert Desmond. Her husband would claim to the police that the last time he saw Amy was the 4th day after she left work. He claimed Amy decided to quit her job, leave her car behind, and instead chose to have him drop her off at a train station in Cambridge, Massachusetts at noon. He would say he watched her leave, but it was amicable, and this was the last time he spoke to her. Although this wasn't typical of her behavior, nor was the suggestion that her husband was even capable of being amicable. All they had, though, was suspicion. Well, there's no proof that she took a train, and also nothing to indicate anything other than what Robert Desmond claimed, even though nothing about this sounded logical. They found no evidence suggesting he'd hurt her, but the entire claim of his didn't ring true either, especially to those who knew her. It turns out that Desmond's treatment of Amy was always in question. Her family didn't care for how he treated her, and this was at the core from everything that happened to separate her from her family. 18 months would pass before her family would push back harder after the police initially looked at the case. They would be the ones to file the missing person report. Her coworker was still concerned also, explaining her husband was seen as controlling and abusive. In fact, he required Amy to provide her whereabouts at any and every given moment. He exerted complete control over her and her behavior. So it's even more out of character that he would just let her walk away and be okay with it. To her coworkers, nothing sounded right about that story. Those coworkers would allege that Desmond had a really violent temper and he was abusive. And this had been going on for years. The authorities, for their part, were convinced she didn't just leave. Her driver's license lapsed, and it was never renewed. It's not clear if her husband ever tried to explain why she took a train to leave when she had a car. Nor is it clear what happened to the car itself, but it's noted the licensing for that Pontiac would also lapse. She had a degree in engineering and hospital maintenance. Her Social Security work history would indicate she had not worked since she went missing. Her coworkers would open up saying that the days before she disappeared, she was covered with bruises, and there was one injury a while back that led them to believe her husband may have broken her back. She would show up with clumps of hair missing, bruises. Sometimes she would be limping. It became common knowledge at work that she was being abused, and they would report that they heard her crying over the phone when talking to him. It was clear there was a real problem. The police would question him multiple times over the years, and his story would always change. There was the possibility of convening a grand jury at one point, and Robert Desmond was adamant that he wouldn't allow his son to testify, and as his remaining parent, it appears he had that right. So it's not clear what the boy might know. Amy's family would never meet her son, Michael. They went to court for visitation rights and won them, but before they could use those rights to see Michael, his father took the boy and fled to California. Amy was 38 years old at the time of her disappearance and described as 5'6" and 110 pounds. She had brown hair and hazel eyes. Her son, Michael, was either 6 when she went missing or when her family won visitation. Michael would likely be about 26 to 28 today. Hopefully the father's behavior wasn't directed at him and that his life has been okay. Hopefully he will one day connect with his grandparents if he hasn't yet. Amy Sher has been missing for 20 years. If she's still alive, she would be 58 today. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. So if you enjoy the content here and you're not sure, take a peek to see if you're subscribed. Take care of yourselves and each other.